It was a moonless night when Jake, Lisa, and Ben set off on their road trip. The trio had planned a spontaneous getaway, eager to escape the monotony of city life. The route they chose was a desolate highway that wound through dense forests, reputed to be haunted. They laughed off the rumors, believing them to be nothing more than local folklore. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, the trees seemed to close in on them, and the darkness grew impenetrable. Jake, behind the wheel, felt a growing unease, but he kept it to himself, not wanting to ruin the mood. Lisa and Ben were in the back seat, dozing off, lulled by the rhythmic hum of the car engine. The car's headlights barely pierced the oppressive darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced along the road. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, illuminated by the car's headlights. It was a young woman, her clothes tattered and her eyes wide with fear. Jake swerved to avoid her, skidding to a halt a few yards away. Lisa and Ben jolted awake, their hearts racing. The woman stood motionless, her eyes fixed on them, and Jake could see the fear etched into her pale face. "Did you see that?" Jake gasped, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Lisa nodded, her face pale. Ben suggested they check if the woman needed help. Reluctantly, they all agreed and got out of the car. The night was eerily silent, and the cold air bit at their skin as they approached the woman, who began to speak in a barely audible whisper. "Help me. He's coming for me." Before they could respond, a bone-chilling scream echoed through the forest. The woman's face contorted in terror as she pointed behind them. They turned around to see a shadowy figure emerging from the woods, its eyes glowing a sinister red. The air grew cold, and an oppressive sense of dread enveloped them. Without thinking, they sprinted back to the car, the woman following close behind. Jake floored the gas pedal, and the car sped off, leaving the ghostly figure behind. As they drove, the woman vanished, leaving them shaken and confused. The rest of the journey was a blur, punctuated by glimpses of eerie shadows and distant whispers. When they finally reached their destination, they were too scared to leave the car, opting to spend the night in its cramped confines. They huddled together, their minds racing with the inexplicable events of the night. The next morning, they found an old newspaper article in a local diner detailing the disappearance of a young woman who had been hitchhiking on that very highway. Her body was never found, and it was believed she had fallen victim to a serial killer who haunted the area. Jake, Lisa, and Ben realized they had encountered her restless spirit, still seeking help from beyond the grave. Haunted by the experience, they cut their trip short and returned home, vowing never to travel that road again. The memory of the phantom hitchhiker lingered with them, a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the darkness. They tried to share their story with friends and family, but few believed them, dismissing it as a wild tale born of overactive imaginations. As time passed, Jake, Lisa, and Ben found it difficult to forget the encounter. Nightmares plagued their sleep, and they often felt a chilling presence when driving at night. The incident had left an indelible mark on their lives, forever altering their perception of reality. They became more cautious, always second-guessing their instincts when faced with unfamiliar situations. Years later, Jake drove down that same highway out of necessity. His heart pounded as he approached the stretch where they had seen the phantom hitchhiker. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered and the engine sputtered. Panic set in as the car coasted to a stop. In the silence, Jake saw her again, the young woman standing by the roadside, her eyes filled with the same haunting plea for help. This time, he knew what to do. He whispered a prayer and promised her he would seek justice for her. As if understanding, she slowly faded away, and the car roared back to life. Jake drove away, hoping that his promise had given her some peace. Mark and Jenna were on a cross-country road trip, eager to explore the hidden gems of America. They enjoyed the freedom of the open road, but as night fell, they decided to stop at a rest area to stretch their legs and grab some snacks. The rest stop was eerily quiet, with only a single flickering light casting long shadows. The silence was oppressive, and even the crickets seemed to have fallen mute. As they stepped out of the car, they noticed an old, dilapidated building nearby, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling. A sense of unease washed over them, but they shrugged it off and headed to the vending machines. As they made their selections, an old man emerged from the shadows, his face lined with age and sorrow. His eyes held a depth of despair that made them shiver. "Be careful," he warned in a raspy voice. "This place is cursed. Many who stop here never leave." Mark and Jenna exchanged uneasy glances, but decided to ignore the warning. They thanked the man and returned to their car, ready to continue their journey. The old man watched them with a look of resignation, as if he knew they would regret their decision. As they drove away, they noticed their gas gauge dropping rapidly, even though they had just filled up. Confused, Mark pulled over to check the tank, only to find it empty. Jenna suggested they return to the rest stop and ask the old man for help. They reluctantly agreed, feeling a growing sense of dread. When they arrived, the old man was nowhere to be found. The building now seemed even more ominous, and the air grew thick with an unexplainable tension. Desperate, they decided to investigate, hoping to find someone who could assist them. Inside, the building was a maze of dark hallways and empty rooms filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. The floorboards creaked under their feet, and the walls seemed to whisper their secrets. They stumbled upon an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. As Jenna read aloud, they discovered it belonged to a woman named Eliza, who had been murdered at the rest stop years ago. Her spirit was said to haunt the place, seeking revenge on anyone who crossed her path. The more they read, the more they felt a chilling presence surrounding them. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlight. In the darkness, they heard whispers and footsteps approaching. Panicked, they tried to find their way out, but were met with locked doors and dead ends. The whispers grew louder, and they could feel a presence closing in on them. The air was filled with a palpable sense of malevolence. Mark and Jenna clung to each other, their hearts pounding in their chests. They managed to find an open window and scrambled out, only to be confronted by the ghostly figure of Eliza. Her eyes burned with fury, and her voice echoed in their minds. "You cannot leave," she hissed. "You belong to me now." With no other option, they ran back to their car, praying it would start. To their relief, the engine roared to life and they sped away, never looking back. As they reached the highway, they noticed the gas gauge was back to normal and the oppressive feeling had lifted. The rest stop had disappeared into the night, leaving them with more questions than answers. Mark and Jenna never spoke of the incident again, but the memory of the cursed rest stop haunted them for the rest of their lives. They warned their friends and family, urging them to avoid the desolate stretch of road forever marked by the vengeful spirit of Eliza. Despite their warnings, some people were drawn to the mystery, seeking the thrill of the unknown. Years later, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the rest stop, driven by curiosity and disbelief. Mark and Jenna heard about the expedition and tried to dissuade them, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. The teenagers never returned, adding another chapter to the legend of the cursed rest stop. Mark and Jenna often wondered if Eliza's spirit would ever find peace. They researched the history of the area, uncovering more stories of disappearances and strange occurrences. It seemed that Eliza was not the only restless spirit trapped there. They became obsessed with finding a way to lift the curse, hoping to put an end to the hauntings. Their search led them to a local historian who revealed that the land had been the site of numerous tragedies over the centuries. The rest stop was merely the latest chapter in a long history of suffering. Mark and Jenna realized that the curse was much older and more powerful than they had imagined. They knew they had to tread carefully, or they might become its next victims. Tom, Sarah, and their friends were on a thrilling road trip, traveling in a convoy of 3 cars. They had planned a night drive through the scenic routes of the countryside, excited to experience the adventure under the stars. The road was deserted, and the only light came from their headlights, slicing through the pitch-black night. The excitement in the air was palpable, and they sang along to their favorite songs, their laughter echoing in the night. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, they noticed an old, rusted sign pointing to an abandoned town. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to take a detour, hoping to explore the remnants of the forgotten place. The road leading to the town was narrow and winding, flanked by dense trees that seemed to whisper secrets. The further they went, the more they felt like they were stepping back in time. The convoy made its way to the center of the town, where an old, decrepit gas station stood. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. Tom, Sarah, and their friends got out of their cars, the thrill of exploration tinged with a sense of foreboding. The town looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry, with remnants of a life long forgotten. As they wandered through the ghost town, they heard faint voices and saw fleeting shadows in the corners of their eyes. They tried to dismiss it as their imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The buildings were in various states of disrepair, and they couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. They decided to regroup and head back to their cars, only to find them covered in a thick layer of dust, as if they had been abandoned for years. Panic set in as they realized their phones had no signal, and the town seemed to be cut off from the outside world. They tried to start the cars, but the engines refused to turn over. Desperation turned to terror when they saw ghostly figures emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted in anguish. The apparitions moved silently, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. One of the figures stepped forward, a young man dressed in old-fashioned clothing. He spoke in a hollow voice, telling them the town was cursed, and anyone who entered would be trapped forever. The group tried to flee, but the ghostly figures surrounded them, their cold hands reaching out to drag them into the darkness. The air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of despair filled their hearts. Tom, Sarah, and their friends fought with every ounce of strength they had, but the spirits were relentless. One by one, they were pulled into the void, their screams echoing through the night. Tom and Sarah managed to break free and ran towards the edge of the town, the ghostly figures in hot pursuit. They could feel the cold breath of the spirits on their necks. As they reached the main road, a blinding light engulfed them, and they found themselves back in their cars, parked on the side of the highway. The ghost town had vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. Shaken and disoriented, they checked their phones to find they were once again in range, with messages from worried friends and family. They drove in silence, the memory of the vanishing convoy etched into their minds. They had escaped the cursed town, but the haunting presence of the ghostly figures lingered. They never spoke of the night again, but the fear of being trapped in the ghost town haunted their dreams, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking on the open road. The experience had left them wary of taking detours and exploring abandoned places. Years later, they heard stories of other travelers who had encountered the ghost town and its cursed inhabitants. Some claimed to have seen the convoy of cars, covered in dust as if frozen in time. Others spoke of hearing the anguished cries of the trapped souls. Tom and Sarah realized that the curse was far from over. Determined to find a way to break the curse, they began to research the history of the abandoned town. They discovered that it had been the site of a tragic massacre during the early 1900s. The townspeople had been brutally murdered by a band of outlaws, and their spirits had been trapped there ever since, unable to find peace. With the help of a local historian, they learned that the only way to free the spirits was to perform a ritual of cleansing and remembrance. Tom and Sarah gathered the necessary items and returned to the site of the ghost town. As they performed the ritual, they could feel the spirits watching them, their presence a mix of hope and fear. The air grew warmer, and a sense of calm washed over them as they completed the ritual. The ghostly figures appeared one last time, their faces no longer twisted in anguish, but showing signs of relief. One by one, they faded into the light, finally finding the peace they had long sought. Tom and Sarah left the site, knowing they had done something meaningful. The ghost town was never seen again, and the stories of the vanishing convoy became a distant memory. Tom and Sarah continued their travels, always mindful of the lessons they had learned. They shared their experience with others, hoping to prevent anyone else from falling victim to the curse. The road was once again a place of adventure and freedom, but they never forgot the haunting journey that had changed their lives forever.